Well, hello everyone. Good morning. It's lovely to see you all. So I only have 5 minutes of time and I have a lot of things to say, so I'm gonna make the most of it. Well, my name is Pedram Ghamisi and I work as a visiting professor and the leader of AI for RS at the Institute of Advanced Research in Artificial Intelligence, or IARAI in short. Well, we at IARAI perform basic and applied research in artificial intelligence, and we perform interdisciplinary research works on the subjects of AI, simulation, and geospatial data modeling. Well, the good thing is IARAI is also located in Vienna, so feel free to come and visit us here in Vienna. Well, first of all, welcome to the second workshop on complex data challenges in Earth observation, or CDCEO in short. The CDCEO focuses on advancing research in Earth observation using cutting-edge AI algorithms. The main purpose of organizing CDCEO is to bring together people with diverse backgrounds, diverse fields of research, including AI, big data, Earth observation, remote sensing, weather and climate modeling, and geographic information system. Well, as you know, this year CDCEO has been organized together with IJK, and as you know, IJK is one of the best conferences in the field of AI. So we feel proud to be able to organize CDCEO together with IJK this year. And as I said before, IJK or CDCEO is held this year in Vienna, and there are lots of must-see places here. And based on Mercer's quality of life survey, Vienna has been selected as the best city to live in worldwide several times in a row. So feel free to visit this city to the best you can. Well, in order to organize this workshop, we received a huge amount of help from our colleagues from all over the world. These colleagues helped us as steering committee members, organizing committee members, and PC members. We selected our steering committee from two institutes, TU Vienna and IARAI, because they are located here in Vienna. We selected our organizers from all over the world, from Linz University, from European Space Agency, from Maxar Technology, from Griffith University, University of Tokyo, RIKEN, Salian University of Technology, Helmholtz Institute in Germany, and Microsoft Research. And in order to ensure the highest quality of review process, we chose our PC members among the best scientists in the field of AI for remote sensing from all over the world, from Griffith University, from IARAI, from Wuhan University, from Hunan, from NASA, from European Space Agency, PhilLab, RIKEN, Nanjing University of Technology, and the Ohio State University. Well, although we have a one-day workshop, we have a lot of things to say today. So we have three sessions dedicated to oral presentations, one session on a landslide for sense competition, and 3 invited talks. The first actually one of the invited talks will be given by Nantiera in a virtual format on the subject of machine learning for monitoring ground deformation with INSAR data. Another talk will be given by Professor Vipin Kumar from University of Minnesota on big data in climate and earth sciences, challenges and opportunities for machine learning. And another talk will be given by Neboshka Jojic from Microsoft Research on the subject of geospatial AI at scales. Well, as I said before, we dedicated one session to the landslide for sense competition. Here we announce the winners and they present their winning approaches. And last but not least, let me provide you with some statistics. We received in total submissions from 28 countries, and it was really impressive. Among all these submissions, we only could accept 13 papers because we had a one-day workshop here. 8 of those will be given in oral presentation format, and 5 of them will be given in flash talks format. For oral presentations, we have 10 minutes of presentation followed by 5 minutes of Q&A, and for flash talks we only have 5 minutes of presentation with no Q&A. And the submitted papers covered a variety of very interesting subjects. For example, change detection, text image retrieval, land cover mapping, scene classification, weakly supervised learning, natural hazards monitoring, advanced attacks and defenses, adversarial attacks and defenses, and AI for good. Well, I think I already used most of, actually, more than my time. So, without any further ado, I would like to ask Professor Vipin Kumar to come here and present his work. Professor.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. What I'm going to talk about is some of the major challenges that are facing us as a humanity as we look into the future, not too distant future, and what Earth observation data and machine learning can do in general to help address them. And so the first slide is simply reminding us of where we are. We, of course, are experiencing a pretty severe heat wave all over the world, including Europe and the rest of the world. And we are already beginning to see the very serious impacts of climate change that we are hoping they'll be multiple decades away. Okay? And what is even more remarkable is that many of these changes would be irreversible, and then you can sort of see this frequency and intensity increasing. You see it from forest fires to droughts to hurricanes to floods and so forth. And it's a pretty serious challenge, and it's certainly for the younger people in this in this meeting, you're going to see that in your lifetime. Many of us sort of are going to see only the beginning part of it, but you will see pretty serious consequences unless something really serious is done. And you hear a lot about climate change in the newspaper, in the TV, and of course not very much action until now, but still people are hearing about it. But it's only one of the several interconnected environmental challenges that are facing the humanity, and addressing any one of them in isolation can actually make things worse. So this is sort of gives you an idea as to what else is going on. The other thing that's happening sort of slowly, perhaps not as slowly, is the increasing population. And as we try to feed this larger population, what exactly does it do to the biodiversity on the planet? So if you look at the population in the middle of the previous century, the population of the Earth was about 3 billion. At the turn of the century, it became 6 billion, 3 to 6. Then between 2000 and 2010, it rose up by 1 billion, so 7 billion. Today, it's about 8 billion. So there's a dramatic increase in the population. And in the past, one of the many things that we have done as a humanity to feed the growing population of the Earth is to use larger areas for agriculture. So we would deforest more and more land, and that's how humanity, of course, has done over the last 10,000 years since the beginning. Then the humans started farming. And here is an example. From Indonesia, you can see this picture of several hundred square kilometers. You see the right part of this is dense forest. It may not be visible, but it's really dark forest. And the left of it, if you look at it closely, it's a collection of palm trees, the oil palm trees. And the product from these palm trees, of course, are in every single kitchen cabinet around the world. You open your kitchen cabinet, you find something that you want to eat, and if you look closely, there'll be a little bit of palm oil coming from these trees, right? So just to give you an example. So as we are deforesting more and more land for agriculture, and again, this is just one of the many examples, what are the consequences of that? It has a very direct interaction with climate change. Trees are some of the most viable sources of carbon, and then if you cut them, and then they basically emit the carbon, and that's a pretty dangerous thing. It makes things worse for the climate change. But that's only one of the interactions that we see between the agriculture and the climate change. The other thing is even if we got the zero carbon future somehow by fusion, nuclear fusion or something, if we simply keep cutting trees, basically what we're sort of doing is we are reducing dramatically the biodiversity. And then once it reaches a certain point, the humans cannot survive because we need a whole bunch of systems to sort of support her. So this is climate change is occurring in front of us. It's a challenge that's already facing us today. It would become much worse in a few decades and even much worse in another 100 years. But this is a challenge that's a little bit farther out, but if you lose biodiversity, there is no turning back. So this is like existential threat for the humanity, right? So this is a serious problem, and again, solving this problem or solving climate change in isolation of this can be a problem. Solving this problem under the context of climate change becomes more difficult because some of the solutions that you want are sort of exacerbated by other issues here. The third challenge that we have is the water. Well, as you know, water is essential to life, and the amount of water, the population has increased, as I said, tremendously. But because of changing climate, the availability of water has become more and more uncertain, in the sense that the amount of water that's falling on the earth isn't going down, it's just that it's becoming more erratic. The more floods, and then there are more droughts. So as a result, the availability of fresh water that humanity needs for drinking is sort of becoming less and less certain. And again, it's changing climate is not the only reason that we're having the water problem. It's also human actions, our policies and such. And I'll give you an example of that. Here is an Aral Sea. This is in the former Soviet Union, the largest freshwater body in Asia, but one of the largest in the world. It used to look like this in 1989, and it became a sliver of this just 25 years later. Like all of this is gone, just a little tiny area left over. And this happened well before the current problem of climate change. It was primarily driven by human actions. This lake was fed by two different rivers from the left and from the north and the south, and the water was diverted for agriculture, for cotton farming, for good intentions. And then, of course, it sort of changed the ecology, it changed the local climate, and it's a major disaster. And this is just an example. It's a poster child because it's the largest case. It's happening all over the world. It's happening today. I was in Salt Lake City just a few days ago giving a talk, and I was telling, of course, they knew that Salt Lake City is built on the Salt Lake, very large lake, and it has shrunk dramatically just because actually the reasons there are almost the same as the one for Aral Sea. So this is happening. So basically, the other problem that you're facing is that the water, as its availability is becoming less and less certain, it's a threat actually at an immediate scale, in the sense that you need water. And I'll just give an example, but all over the world you can find many examples. In California, there's a lot of agriculture. Almost more than half of the fruits and vegetables in the rest of the U.S. actually come from Central Valley in California. And agriculture depends upon water, and they are going through the worst drought. Australia is going through the worst drought for many, many decades. So these things are happening all over the world in different sort of levels. So this is another threat. This is the availability of water. And the last challenge I just want to address upon is that it's not just the availability of water that's under threat, but if you're drinking water, you want it to be safe. You want it to be drinkable water, right? And one of the many things we have done to address some of the other challenges, like increasing population and need for more food, is to intensify agriculture. The same piece of land now produces more yield than it used to do 50, 60 years ago. And one of the ways you do that, of course, is you put in more fertilizers. And when you put in more fertilizer, some of it washes away into the rivers and the oceans, and then it goes to this lake. This is the Lake Erie, one of the large lakes in the United States. I'm just showing an example because it's like hundreds of kilometers, in size from here to here, for example. So it's like 1,000 kilometers. It's a very, very large lake, right? And you see this very large lake covered by this very green and very dangerous algae, in the sense if you drink it, you can die, in the sense that this water is so poisonous it could sort of really kill you. And this is just an example because this happens quite a bit in that area, again, because of agricultural runoff. But no matter where you are in the world, everybody is doing agriculture, everybody's putting fertilizers, and all of this fertilizer is washing into the ocean and is creating dead zones. So this is just a poster child, but It's happening all over the world. In the US, for example, if you look at the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, which starts in Minnesota where I am, goes down and it takes the fertilizer from half of the country into the Gulf, right? So, and again, you can go examples all over the world, anywhere. And this is causing the oceans to nitrify, which means it's the yet another existential challenge for the humanity. If the oceans die with nitrification, there will be no life on the earth. And of course, that's a much longer challenge, but these things all happen slowly, at different scales, and they are sort of coming. We have to watch for that. And I want to sort of say that these challenges should not depress you. They should make you aware of what's happening. And I want to put things in context that these are some of the most prosperous and most peaceful time, despite what you see on the TV and the newspaper, and the history of humanity. In the sense that if you look at the previous 100 years, previous 1,000 years, previous 2,000 years, these are the best of the times, and they were made possible by the revolution in technology and the use of fossil fuel and many, many things that the humanity has learned over the last few hundred years. But those developments have also brought us to these challenges, in the sense that if you turn the clock back 250 years ago, prior to the Industrial Revolution, none of these sort of challenges existed because things were moving very, very slowly. You wait for 500 years and things haven't changed very much, right? Now you wait for 10 years and you sort of see what's going on, right? Things have changed dramatically. So these changes have really helped us to become most prosperous and hopefully more connected and more peaceful, relatively speaking. And yet they have created these challenges that if they're not addressed, all bets are off for humanity for some of these challenges. Changing climate is a very serious challenge, but biodiversity and oceanification or the health of our waterway system, these are all very, very important challenges, right? So what my objective is, and this talk, is to sort of remind us that the technology that has got us here can also be a solution to some of these problems. And again, this is IARAI, and as you sort of said, this is one of the oldest conferences in AI in the world. My first paper that I presented as a graduate student was at IARAI in 1981, 41 years ago in Vancouver. So for me, it has some personal meaning as well. And of course, a lot of this technology that you're seeing today, your smartphones, your being able to transport yourself from one place to the other, in the pandemic, connect to anybody, anywhere in the world, all sorts of things that we take it for granted today are made possible by the technology that got developed by this community that we are part of here. And so this is the golden age of data science, and there is a tremendous opportunity here for using this technology and our community's effort to basically address some of these challenges. Our technology so far is used mostly for things like how do I make it easy for people to buy stuff or connect to each other or transport ourselves more safely and more efficiently, but all important problems, but yet you can actually address some of these problems as well. And of course, I must, as you will see throughout my talk, the Earth observation data, of course, plays an absolutely critical role in all of them, and what I'm going to talk about. And this workshop is, of course, focused on the challenges in Earth observation data, and the challenges in using observation data for many of these environmental problems, or I would sort of say in solving any of these global important problems, are plentiful. I mean, I could sort of go on an entire hour-long lecture on what the challenges are. But one theme that you would see cutting across, in my talk certainly, but perhaps in other places as well, is that there is this phenomena that we're trying to capture. The environmental phenomena on a global scale has very high degree of heterogeneity in both space and time. What it sort of means is that the relationships and the predictive models that you build for one location in one period do not work in another location and another period because of the high degree of variability. And as a result, the traditional methodologies sort of break down. Okay? And but what we hope to leverage is the fact that a lot of these problems that we're trying to solve are they relate to environmental processes, and we do have scientific knowledge about these processes, and how do you leverage that inside the machine learning framework? It sort of gets you, how do you dig out of the hole? Again, in my talk, and in, of course, many of the talks that you would see in the rest of this conference and this meeting and this workshop as well, you will see people will talk about the fact that we have very little training data for many of these important problems. And again, and that problem becomes even worse when you're talking about taking a model of one place and taking to a different place, right? Or the phenomena that you're trying to understand is actually not crisp, in the sense that you have to figure out exactly how do you build your objects and so forth. So all of those things are made harder by this challenge. And again, by sort of leveraging the understanding of the underlying physical processes, the key is to be able to sort of bring them in machine learning framework and improve that. Right? So that's sort of going to be a running theme. And again, this is about the Earth observation, and even though I have been in the academia for 4 decades, but my work in the area of machine learning and AI and what it's called big data today, in the context of environmental sciences, started about 22 years ago when the satellite MODIS was launched. MODIS sensor was launched on a Terra and Aqua satellite. And of course, satellites have been around for about almost 5 decades now, a little over 5 decades. But the real work on the analysis of these Earth observation data by wider community started when MODIS sort of made it possible for anybody anywhere in the world to have access to wall-to-wall coverage of the entire globe. So here is this sensor MODIS taking a picture of the Earth every single day, at least once. And if no matter where you are in the world, if you look up in the sky at around 10:30 a.m., you're being photographed. Okay? The photograph is actually very coarse because a square kilometer has only 16 pixels. If you walk out, you won't be noticed. Okay? But buildings would be noticed. If you put up a building, it'll be noticed, right? So as a result, you have information about the Earth at every location, its time series over a period of time, or its picture on a global scale. And again, this community, of course, knows all about it. And there are many, many more satellites and more data sensors available, many of them commercial, many of them taking very fine scale picture of the Earth almost every day at different spectral resolutions. And what I'm going to do in the rest of the talk, and of course you will hear quite a bit in the rest of this workshop, but I'm just going to talk about 3 case studies that relate to the challenges I talked about earlier. And because of the duration of this talk, there's going to be fairly high-level overview of these problems. And then towards the end, I will try to give a more thumb-size, quicker update of a few other problems that you're working on depending upon time. So the 3 problems I'm going to talk about are being able to map the degradations of the forest on a global scale, especially in the tropical area. Now, forests are important, as I mentioned before, because they store so much carbon, and they, just by natural growth, they store as much carbon as about that's emitted by the entire transportation sectors. Okay? Except that humanity managed to burn enough of the trees to counteract all of it, in the sense that they grow, but they also get burnt, and the question is, if you want to really get to the zero carbon future, you really need to protect our forest. There is a almost universal agreement on this globally, but you want to be able to give incentives to people, to the countries, to societies to maintain their forests wherever they are, developed world, or wherever people are living in high population like India, China, or any place else where people are, living a lot of high density, Europe and so forth. Forests have been cut, but the tropical belt where there's still a lot of forest left, you want to give people incentives to be able to maintain them, and you can only do that if you can monitor, and only then you can manage them. So, and how do you do that? Because the area, the forest fires in the tropical world are extremely hard to monitor because those areas remain mostly cloudy, and when the fires burn, there's a lot of smoke, it's very hard to see them. So this is one big problem, and it required development of an entirely new methodologies for for machine learning in which you are forced to work in an environment where you have no training data of the kind that you typically like to use in a machine learning framework. So you're supposed to work with something really approximate and then build this relationship between the spectral values and the target value. So this was a pretty interesting, very challenging piece of work. The other one I mentioned to you about being able to convert they figure out who is sort of converting these trees into these plantations, and why this is important, because some of the largest corporations in the world have promised not to source product from areas which have been recently deforested. Okay? And the idea is that if nobody purchases product from some place which has been deforested for recently, then people will stop cutting the trees for building palm oil plantations and things like that, right? Except that the problem is that how do you know exactly which area is plantation and which area is trees, because from the sky they all look very dense green, they look like forest, right? Okay? So how do you build a system to sort of monitor the growth of these oil palm plantations, for example, became a big challenge. So I'm going to show you how a machinery was developed and made this thing possible. And the third one is, as I mentioned, the availability of surface water is getting more and more uncertain. And the problem is so important that in 2000, about 22 years ago, NASA flew a special mission of the space shuttle just to map water on the Earth. Okay? So we have a reasonably good understanding of how the water looks like 22 years ago, but how has it been changing since then? And so that becomes a big challenge. So these are all the kind of things that we sort of talk about. So again, it's going to feel like, I'm just talking rather rapidly, but there are all papers that sort of go about it, and you can go more deeply. My goal is not to sort of go much deeply into any of these, but give you a high-level sense of challenges and opportunities. And of course, I'm waiting to listen to a lot of the wonderful talks in this session as well. So the first problem of being able to monitor forest fire seems like an easy problem. You just look at the satellite data, you create some training data, and you should be good, build a predictive model. Except that the problem is multifold. That is, there are only some part of the world you have a lot of labels, good labels. State of California, with a lot of forest fires, each year they produce a very good map of all the areas that are burned. Canadians do the same thing. So there's some part of the world the labels are actually pretty reasonable quality. But if you take those labels and build a model, and if you try to work somewhere else, they work horribly. Like if you just go to the tropical, well, actually, if you build a model for labels in California, go to a different state in US, it actually doesn't do very well, right? But in the tropical world, they just do absolutely horribly, right? That's one big problem. That is, we don't have a good quality labels anywhere. Second thing is, this is a problem which is highly imbalanced. That is, at any given time, if you build a model, the model may have, even if it has a very small false positive rate, it can make things look really, really bad, in the sense that even a classifier that has 90% accuracy could be completely useless in the context of monitoring. And then the second thing is, if you don't have labels, how do you measure the performance of a machinery? Because we are all used to taking a sort of labels and use them for cross validations. How do you build a model that can work without it, right? So basically, this all required building an entire framework in which you're trying to predict rare classes in the absence of true labels. But of course, the key situation here, there are highly imperfect labels that are available for all instances. That is, for every instance, whether it's training or test, you have something that is like a feature that's available. It has some information, not good enough. For example, in this particular case, is the mode is active fire is being used as a surrogate variable. And the key machinery in this thing is to, starting from that very weak variable, how do you build a completely automatic framework that gives you a very, very good quality result? And I'm not going to any details, but just to show you that for this tropical belt, using this machinery, we found about 570,000 square kilometer of burned area, for the period 2001-2014, and then of course the state-of-the-art product from NASA. Of course, this was bigger than about a factor of 3. It's not only just bigger than the state-of-the-art by a factor of 3, but was also far more accurate, even where they found it. For example, in Africa, if you use the Sender methodology, you would think there's a lot of areas were burning during this period, but they were not, because they were just mostly happening in forested area. And just to give you the total sample of what the product of this affecting of this product is, if you look at this again, this I'm showing you in Brazil, mostly sugarcane plantation or soybean plantations. There's a very large area in the Amazon, pictured in 2002, and you can see there's very dark areas. These are all forest. A little bit of deforestation along these lines, along the highway. This is all cloud. There's no deforestation here. If you go down to 2015, there's no cloud in this picture, but you see all of these white patches, and they're all deforested. Okay? If you use our product, the machinery sort of create all these locations. Some of them are yellow, some of them are red, and you can sort of see they're all sort of covered the entire patch, and these dots sit directly on the patches that you see on this picture. So basically, this card, all of this area that got deforested by burning in here. So almost one-to-one match there, and so this sort of shows you the power of this machinery. Okay, so now let me just quickly move on to the next case study, which is about the plantation dynamics. And as I mentioned to you, that many of the corporations have promised not to source anything from these places, and as a result, many non-profit corporations sprung up to sort of figure out where the people are building these plantations. So there is an organization called Transparent World that created a map for Indonesia for 2014, saying, well, these are the locations that seem like the oil palm plantation have been built since 2000. It turns out that this map is highly inaccurate and highly incomplete. Somebody else built a map for 2001 and one for 2005 and one for 2009, and they were working on for a map for 2014. It was just released recently, and they're all maps are much better than this, but they're much smaller and much less coverage. And they're all built mostly semi-manually. It takes a long time to build a map like this, years, and they're still not complete. So the question is, how do you build automatically maps like these so that you sort of have a sense of what's going on? You can't really wait for 5 years to figure out if something was burning. So the big challenge is that you're trying to learn from multiple imperfect annotators, because we, sitting in Minnesota, we had no idea as to what's happening in Indonesia, right? So we had to sort of use some of these labels as an input, and of course each location has its own behavior, and how do you sort of use all of this information to build a model that sort of builds these maps dynamically. And again, all of this under the cover. There were a series of papers. One of them was at École, about 7-8 years ago. Collectively, basically, now you have a result of this methodology, which sort of gives you can look at these years, for different 1, 2, 3, and you can sort of see these areas growing. It sort of does a pretty precise job. And of course, for this work to be published, we had to look at high resolution images wherever they were available and use them for validation. Pretty systematic and thorough evaluation that happened almost over a period of a year. One, of course, major utility of this work was that we could actually tell which of these plantations were put following the government regulations, in which you're supposed to cut the trees, move them away, and then put the plantations, as opposed to simply burn the trees and replace them by plantation. And if you look at this area, all of the dots that you see here are plantations. Each dot is about a square kilometer, so it's a pretty large area, as you can see. So basically, there's the plantations that were built in, and this slide shows you, because of the previous case study, which of them were burned before being planted. So you can sort of see almost half of them have been sort of simply burned and replaced by plantation. Not a good thing to do, right? But look at this area. This is all burned. Now, when you're trying to put a plantation in this area and you're trying to burn, the fire doesn't know any boundary. You want to put a plantation in a certain area, that's the plant you are licensed for, but the fires can spread. And what was the collateral damage that might have happened? You can use, again, the previous case study to figure out somebody built a plantation here and all of this area just got burned for no reason, right? So it's the collateral damage. So you can sort of tell as to not only what damage you did to the environment and how much else you did it. So this is all sort of the utility that sort of comes with the machine learning methodology. So last case study, very, very quickly, I'm going to talk about is being able to map water on the Earth. And as I said, the NASA flew a space shuttle mission in 2000. So you might think you have a lot of training data, because it's global from every single place, except that, as I mentioned, the relationship between the spectral signatures and whatever you're trying to figure out changes from one location to the other. And just to give you, since this is a meeting on the remote sensing, so these are all false color composites. And you can see the color of land and water looks different in 3 different parts of Africa. Okay? In the same location, the colors of land and water can look different from one time to the other time. Okay? Or, but much worse, as anybody working in remote sensing will sort of know, that we're looking at the data that's collected from the sky through all these aerosols and such, which means a lot of time you don't even have a data. So anytime you see in this video a pink color, that means there is really no data. Now, it makes you wonder, whenever there is data, what's the quality of that data? So like, if you don't have data, at least you know there's no data. But if the data is so bad that they didn't even produce anything, that means the quality could be really, really bad. So all of this creates a lot of uncertainty for machinery. So how do you build machine learning models that are robust to that? And that sort of becomes a theme that is, this was one of the first problem we started working on in 2014, and where we have to sort of solve this problem to sort of figure out exactly what's about these water bodies that make them water bodies. Rather than analyzing them pixels at a time, you look at them as a water body. So using that machinery, we built a global product. One of the first products we released was at a MODIS scale, which had about 10,000 water bodies across the globe. And you could do all sorts of analysis. For example, if you look at this viewer, you can go to each of these locations. You'll show dots. This is a Don Martin Dam in Mexico. This viewer would sort of tell you how many MODIS pixels it has. It was 500 meter pixels. So you can see at the peak, this water body was about 800 pixels, which means about 200 square kilometer, pretty large water body. And it had this ups and downs. You can verify this by simply looking at the Google time-lapse image, which is annual. And you can see this animation is sort of moving at pretty much the same rate as you see this thing. You can look at this water bodies and color them. If they're increasing, let's say in this picture they're colored red. If they're decreasing, they're colored green. And you have a bird's eye view of the whole continent, and you might have a sense of what may be happening to the water bodies. For example, you can see here, all of these dots are green. Something is shrinking here. If you zoom here, you can see them all to be green. And if you count all of this area and see number of pixels, almost 12,000 pixels of water existed back in 2002, and it has almost shrunk down to 0. So 12,000 pixels mean almost 3,000 square kilometers of water. That's lots of water. And you can look at one of these water bodies, which is large enough, and you can see the Google time-lapse image sort of showing you the same thing. You go to a different part of the world, and you see a lot of red points. And what's happening here? Well, it's Tibet. It has glaciers, and it has rivers that are fed by those glaciers. They feed about 2 billion people on this planet. Okay? And what's happening? People know that because of global warming, these glaciers are melting. And of course, when the glaciers melt, some of these lakes are becoming bigger, and that's what's being captured by this algorithm, this machinery. And you can see them all on this viewer by going deeply into it. You can sort of see the Google time-lapse image sort of telling you what's happening to them. And you can have an aggregate picture in which it sort of tells you that almost 40,000 pixels, which means about 10,000 square kilometers of water has appeared at the roof of the world. This is very dangerous because this is going to come and bite us. When this water disappears, how do we sort of, you can sort of see these rivers meandering all over the world, very important ecological phenomena, and all sorts of other analysis that I'm skipping just for short of time. I just want to sort of on this case study, just sort of tell you this very last product, which sort of we have just released. The paper in Nature's Scientific Data just came out just a few weeks ago, and but the work has been in progress for quite some time, and it's a multi-scale dynamics from 1984 to 2015 at 30-meter resolution. It used the pixel level labels, which are again incomplete and inaccurate in many cases, but a very critical piece of information which was sort of developed by the JRC, the Joint Research Commission in Europe, and Google, and then using that machinery and the methodology that you saw being used in the previous viewer, we sort of built this product of about 750,000 water bodies, all bigger than 0.1 square kilometer, which means bigger than 10 hectares. And so this is important. This is actually good for a number of reasons. One of them is that it's identified new lakes and reservoirs that were known to people, because there's the biggest set of lakes and reservoirs that people have access to in the community is hydro lakes. It has only about 250,000 water bodies for this scale, for this size scale and the region of the world that we are considering here. And on top of that, we give dynamics of all of these water bodies. And then it has all sorts of very interesting information. And this was, as I said, it was just released, and it sort of is being talked about in many, many different places. Just to give you an idea as to that it does able to find a lot of water bodies compared to the hydro lakes. You see this Amazon, this is the South America, and you can see the red and blue points are found by this machinery, and only about a third of them, which are red, are actually hydro lakes, and others are missing. And again, you can go to any part of the world and you see the same picture as you go deeper. So when you have such a global coverage, you can actually answer many, many questions. You can't simply study only one lake. You don't have to study only one lake. You can try to say, what's happening to the water on a global scale? And you can sort of tell, for example, for the first time, that if I look at all of the surface area of these water bodies in different continents, what may be happening to it, right? You can just count the number of pixels in these water bodies and see, are they growing or shrinking? And you can see different patterns in different parts of the world. So some of these very large increases were driven primarily by, they built a lot of reservoirs in South America and Brazil, and then they started shrinking because of the droughts and so forth. So there are all sorts of phenomena that one could study on a global scale. Okay? So this was a bird's eye view of all of these 3 case studies that we're talking about here. How much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay. 9 minutes. Okay, so then I have a few minutes, so I will leave some time for questions. So this slide is giving you some of the other projects that are going on in my group. Some of them, the upper half, primarily involve data from the Earth observation. The lower half actually involve data from the Earth observations along with the physical models much more deeply. So the top left corner over there is doing exactly what I'm talking about for the Earth, but except that it's being done for the ocean, not the land part, but the ocean part. And this basically, on the left part, again, a methodology was developed to analyze the spatio-temporal patterns in the data from the satellites about the height, the altimetry data, to figure out how the ocean's eddies are moving from one place to the other. So, and it sort of led to there was a series of papers published in AAAI and HKI, and eventually led to a global data set that's being used very extensively by the oceanography community that made available. The next one is about being able to find teleconnections in the global climate system, and again, the data primarily connected through the Earth observation, and then you can find what areas of the global climate system connected to the other, and it led to several papers published in top journals in climate science about completely novel climate phenomena. This one is about being able to map crops at a pixel level at scale, again using the data from Sentinel, the European data product. And basically what it does, it takes the data at a 30-meter resolution that's produced by USDA for crops in the United States, which is highly inaccurate and very, very coarse, and use the data in a machinery to build a pixel-based maps at the Sentinel scale automatically, again using some of the methodology. So this is all about Earth observations, and the lower ones are about mix of Earth observations and physical modeling. And this one is sort of talking about a methodology that we build for understanding not just the availability of water in lakes, but exactly how the temperatures may be changing, because as the lake temperatures change, it has direct impact upon what aquatic species can survive in that water, what becomes invasive, on what the quality of the water may be. And there is an agency in the United States called United States Geological Surveys, and they're in charge of analyzing or maintaining the health of about a couple of 100,000 water bodies in the United States. And the methodology that they had for analyzing them, the state-of-the-art methodology that they used, were not good enough. And this series of work that we have done jointly with them have led to the first of its kind knowledge-guided machine learning techniques that use the physical process understanding and the machine learning techniques together to create these models that are very, very accurate. And those are some of the first examples of where you can build a model for machine learning and go completely out of sample and still do better prediction than not just plain back machine learning, which will not be surprising, but also relative to the pure physics model. So this is actually a pretty tremendous advancement. And as a result of this piece of work, which has many, many stops, now we have the surface temperature variations constructed for 186,000 lakes in the United States. The paper was published just about 6 months ago. And again, first of its kind study. This is applying, building new methodologies for hydrology that is being able to predict the, whether the rivers are going to flood or sort of, there might be droughts. Again, hugely challenged domains. People, and when you have wrong prediction of flood, people die. And being able to sort of combine the machine learning methodology and hydrology to make these predictions better. Again, moving the state-of-the-art work in this area. And the last one, which is very, very recent in the last couple of years, is about agriculture, which I sort of mentioned to you, is a source of problems for us in the sense that we create quality problems, we create climate change problems. A lot of the greenhouse gas is emitted from the agriculture. But then how do you convert agriculture from a carbon-intensive process to something that it can absorb carbon? So basically, the whole interest is in trying to figure out if we can change our practices in such a way that you actually absorb a lot more carbon while you're farming. Okay? And that involves being able to model the carbon emissions from this agriculture. And this methodology that we have developed, starting with the lakes and hydrology, is showing the first of its dramatic improvement in being able to model these things beyond the physical system. So this is just some of the examples. And again, this work has been funded by many, many different projects. One of them is this project called these are the challenge projects, expedition in computing projects. And it's sort of some of the highlights of this project and how it led to different papers and different reports. And with that, let me just finish up by just simply saying that hopefully this has convinced you that this community, and of course we are all part of this, we have an opportunity of using big data and machine learning to improve the understanding of the Earth and its environment. But as we try to do that, we have to advance machine learning. It's not, a lot of times we can use these techniques, but in many cases we have to create methodological advances. And this novel approaches that in which machine learning is being used simultaneously with physical process understanding is now being used in almost every single discipline you can think of. So this is a very, very fast growing area in which it has had impact far beyond some of the environmental problems we are sort of talking about. Okay? And lastly, just want to sort of tell you, of course, this work is funded by many, many different grants from different agencies and private corporations around the world. And I have collaborators. This work won't be possible without collaborators, and they span every single discipline you can imagine, and many, many different universities. And here is a picture of my 25 graduate students whose work has focused primarily on environment in this last 20 years. And this picture is just meant to show you that most of them are PhD students and a few of them are postdocs. And all of them, of course, work on environmental problems. About a third of them are in academia and of course, pursuing the environmental problems. But a lot of them are working for internet scale companies. And the point is that if you work on environmental problems, you're still very heavily marketable, because if you're working on big problems, everybody needs you. Everybody can sort of find a job for you. But working in these problems is much harder, as many of you would know. You have to spend a lot more time trying to build a solution, especially that has a lasting value, than than writing papers that are typical in conferences. So with that, I am going to stop and thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take it.
Thank you very much for this very nice presentation. And this shows one of the examples of how we can use machine learning to solve real-world issues. So any questions? We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, please. Yes.
So you, fantastic work. It's really cool to see the breadth of everything you're working on. when you're talking about the identifying forest fires in Indonesia and then with lakes, you said that this led to like a 3 times increase over whatever was state of the art with NASA. But how are you able to validate all of that?
So the validation of that work took almost 2 years because the community, the remote sensing community, would try to say, hey, look, to the machine learning community, we could show the formulation and say, look, there are proofs. But to the remote sensing community, they really need to see the real proof. And which is really, really hard. And the real way the remote sensing community does is that you create a reference data set. Okay? Which means you work hard and then you sort of look at the pictures and go through them and figure out what you think are reasonably accurate versions. And it took us more than a year to do that, but the student did it, right? And that data got produced, it got and again we made it public to anybody, and then basically that was sort of used to sort of show the quality of this product. And again, same thing happened for the water. It was not as hard as it was for the forest fire, but it was, and the same thing actually happened for the palm oil plantations. For that one, we got lucky. We had digital globe creates 0.5 centimeter pictures for the globe, but only sporadically. So we looked at every single picture that they had for the last 20 years, and we said, these are the pictures, these are the ground truth, and let's look at, we know exactly for these pictures what it looks like, and that was sort of used to figure out what was the inaccuracy of the other products, the TP and the other ones, and how accurate our product was. So the entire thing sort of was published in a remote sensing journal. And you had a question?
Yes, thanks a lot for a fantastic talk. I mean, that shows really the importance of this research and the impact for society. So in one of your slides, of the last years of your slides, you showed the hybrid models.
Yes.
And actually my question is that, do you think that with enough data, just AI models will be able to capture by itself the physical phenomena that are actually behind all the processes, or we still will need these physical models to be to create better predictors?
Okay, so this is what we have found. That is, the data is going to be never enough because of the spatial and temporal heterogeneity. So for example, in hydrology, they could study a basin very, very precisely. So they have lots of sensors. But then they build a model which is very, very accurate in this river, in this basin. You go to another basin and it completely falls apart, right? So which is why we need this methodology in which we build machine learning and process model together. And actually, in many cases, we have built the self-supervised learning framework, which are, of course, using the scientific knowledge inside the framework. And they are the ones that sort of do dramatically. In the last 6 months, we've had 2 papers. One of them is being presented next week at KDD, 2 weeks from now. Other one was presented at SIAM conference, which won the best paper award. So what I'm saying is that there are ways to sort of work with the constraints if you use the information from the scientific world. I think there will never be enough data because of the heterogeneity that you can rely upon it in many, many cases, not in all solutions, but in many cases. But great question, though.
Any other question? Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Professor. I'm also very interested in your knowledge-based machine learning. And I have a question is that what type of knowledge we can use in the climate change? You have given some example about the neighborhood. There have some completed neighborhood, and how about the dynamic process and how to combine the knowledge of the process into the machine learning?
Again, very good question, and of course you'll have to read my papers, but the ability to combine physical process into the framework, it actually it transcends in each one of these applications I talked about, including the ones before, right? But the way you combine it getting more and more sophisticated, because when we started 14 years ago, we had very limited understanding. But the ideas are being pursued in all of them, and as I said, this is the greenhouse gas emission estimation, and this is the most complex problem we have dealt with, and this is the first demonstration that you can actually, because people have built very complex physical models, they don't work very well in predicting the emission. Machine learning does horribly because it's very poor, right? But together they do dramatically better. So these are like, hydrology, same thing, lake monitoring, same thing. So what I'm saying that this is just a prototype we have. Here we have a global solution, just like I present you for water. Like this is the national scale solution, 186,000 water bodies we can do the modeling, right? This one, we're making good progress. I just gave a plenary talk at a meeting of hydrology just about 2 months ago. This is hydrologists they wanted to listen as to how machine learning is helping us, right? So basically, so what I'm saying is that we're making progress. There's a tremendous opportunity. This is a very fast evolving field. And deeper understanding, I think if you send me your email, I'll send you the papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because of the time, we need to proceed with the next presentation. And let's give it up to talk to this So the next talk is causal inference with Bayesian modeling and field test as an instrument, which will be given by Lili Zhu from Harvard University.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much to the organizers for putting together this very important theme. Thank you so much, Vipin, for such a great introduction with this keynote. So as mentioned, my name is Lili Zhu, and I'm a PhD student at Harvard. I'll be presenting this work, which is joint with Rachel Guo, who recently graduated as an undergraduate from Harvard, and Andrew Perot, standing back there, who is assistant faculty at Ohio State. And this work is answers the question. Comes up with the observation that ranger patrols do deter poachers, and the way we do so is using causal inference with Bayesian modeling and field tests as an instrumental variable. The challenge that we're motivated by is wildlife conservation, and specifically thinking of how to help rangers plan patrols to better conserve animals. So globally, there are over 1 million species driven to extinction through human activities, the primary of which are land use change, habitat destruction, as in habitat destruction, and poaching prevention. And poaching prevention helps fuel a $23 billion annual wildlife trade. In order to help protect animals from being poached, we have protected areas. Over 14% of terrestrial land is designated as protected area, but poachers still are able to get in and place snares to trap animals. So in order to help conserve animals in those places, we have over 10,000 rangers around the world who conduct patrols looking for wire snares that poachers have placed out to trap animals, and so that they can disarm and remove as many of those snares as possible. What we're trying to do is help answer this question of how do poachers respond to patrols so that we can most effectively understand how much to fund and how to plan ranger patrols. And surprisingly, this question has been a long open question in the space of conservation biology. And the reason why this is so hard comes from two main factors. The first, as we all well know, is that correlation does not imply causation. So first of all, data in this space is very scarce. We don't have very much data. There's a lot of uncertainty in where snares are being placed and where poachers are going. But furthermore, even if we were to study that data, it would only give us correlational conclusions, and that has been the case. There have been several papers in the conservation biology world that have studied the data that we do have available and found some correlative studies of deterrence, but sometimes with kind of inconclusive results, or again, it's not causal. And the gold standard for causal analysis is through randomized controlled trials. However, in this domain of conservation, RCTs are not feasible for two reasons. One, monetarily, they are very expensive to implement. We have to go through scientific design. We have to fund patrols to do these patrols for our study. But furthermore, and more importantly, it's very expensive from a conservation standpoint, because the opportunity cost of not having rangers patrol a certain area and seeing what are poachers doing there means that animals are being poached and unfortunately killed. So we just can't sacrifice species for that. The second primary challenge to answering this question is that we have unobserved outcome variables. So I have here a picture of a wire snare. And even in this photograph where the snare is kind of directly placed, it's small and hard to see. So you can imagine that rangers going through very large protected areas might easily miss this. They might not walk in the area where the snare is, or they might not see it if they go right there. And what this means is that when rangers patrol an area in the park, if they observe a snare, we know that a snare is present because they saw it. But if they observe no snares, then we don't know for certain whether or not a snare is actually present. So the actual outcome is uncertain. And this shows a distinction between whether or not rangers detect snares versus the true presence of a snare and how these are separate. We don't know this exactly. And I want to highlight that the fact that we have this uncertainty in the outcome variables means that even if we were able to do a randomized control trial, we would still have the challenge of imperfect detection that would hinder us from drawing any sort of direct causal conclusion. So in order to overcome these two challenges, our work here is the first causal study of the effect of ranger patrols. The contributions of our work span 3 disciplines. The first in conservation is that we are the first to show a causal effect of deterrence. And in order to do this, we have the insight that historical field tests that were implemented in a protected area can serve as an instrument for instrumental variable analysis. From an AI perspective, we introduce a novel Bayesian framework in order to impute the true labels to address that uncertainty in outcome labels that I was just talking about. And finally, from a statistical point of view, we now enable cause analysis to be done with unobserved labels. Okay. And now I'll talk about how we actually do all of this. And I'll start off with setting the scene. So we are looking in Uganda, in Eastern Africa, at Murchison Falls National Park. So Murchison Falls is a very large protected area on the northwest corner of Uganda. It is nearly 4,000 square kilometers in size, which is about 2/3 the size of Singapore. And to understand what's at stake, Murchison Falls is home to a very wide diversity of species, including hippos, kob, buffalo, and Rothschild's giraffe. Murchison Falls is a huge ecotourism hotspot, but is unfortunately subject to a lot of poaching as well. So our group at Harvard has worked previously with the Uganda Wildlife Authority to help predict poaching hotspots, leveraging historical ranger patrol data. So this work, which we call PAWS, is an AI system that takes in historical ranger patrol data and predicts the likelihood of poaching throughout the park. This has been the bulk of my PhD work. But in order to evaluate the efficacy of our PAWS AI system, our group implemented a series of field tests in Murchison Falls where we sent rangers to areas that our PAWS system predicted to be high, medium, or low risk of poaching. And this was to say, is our model actually able to discriminate between relative poaching threats at the park? But critically, our insight in this work is that each of these areas, which were recommended as the field tests, means that for a very specific period of time, the 4 months during this field study, we encouraged rangers to patrol isolated areas more than they otherwise would have. And this act of encouragement acts as a shock to the system, to this conservation system, that actually changes what they were doing on the ground. And this act of encouragement creates this kind of treatment group, which were the sites that were selected for field tests, versus the control groups, which is everything else in the park, where they were still doing their patrols as usual, but then just going towards some of these areas more than expected. So this historical field test can actually be leveraged for instrumental variable analysis because of this act of encouragement. So that was the first insight to enable causal analysis. But now we still have this challenge, and this instrumental variable enables us to kind of mimic a randomized control trial, addressing that first challenge. But then for the second challenge of imperfect detection, we know that snares are hard to detect. And specifically, if we look at the historical ranger patrol data, what I'm plotting here on the x-axis is the amount of patrol effort. So we know not only where rangers have been in the park, but we know how much time they spent at each of those locations, which you can measure either in terms of hours that they patrolled in a given month, or the distance that they covered. So for 1 square kilometer region, did they walk through for half a kilometer, so maybe they probably weren't likely to see anything. But if they walked 10 kilometers in a single month and they still didn't find anything, we could be much more confident that that is a true negative observation. And what I'm plotting here is across the x-axis, the amount of patrol effort measured in terms of distance patrolled, normalized. And the y-axis is the probability of poaching. So you see here that as rangers exert more effort, the likelihood of finding a snare actually does go up. So the insight that we have here is that we can use patrol effort as a proxy for the reliability of our uncertain negative labels, which enables us to build a Bayesian model to address that second challenge of imperfect detection. So specifically to do so, I'll introduce 3 variables. X is our patrol effort, and Y is detection. So for the same plot, we have on our x-axis our patrol effort X, and then on the y-axis is our detection, so the probability of detection given a certain amount of patrol effort. But critically, this y-axis, what we're able to detect, is not the true outcome variable that we want, whether or not poaching exists. So I have this marked with kind of a dashed line to show that we don't actually know what this is, this value is. So in order to impute for the true poaching level z, we also add the geospatial features of each area in the park. So this is information about animal density, elevation, land cover, distance to village, distance to patrol post, and so on. And we use this to build a machine learning model that acts as a Bayesian model to impute for this value of z. And to do so, we are trying to say, given these knowns are x, y, and f, what is the probability of a z conditioned on the known variables? So if our observation is 1, we detect poaching, then we know the probability that there's actually poaching is 1. And then if we don't detect anything, then we have to do this imputation, which enables us to get that value for z to overcome this challenge of imperfect detection. And here, for example, is the outcome of the Bayesian neural network that we train. And with these 2 tools in mind, our instrumental variable from the field tests, and then our Bayesian model to account for imperfect detection, we can now turn to this causal question that we really want to ask, which is, what is the effect of patrolling on poaching in the next month? So we have here patrol, our x, at time t, which is during the months of these field tests. And then we're studying this variable, whether or not poaching was present, which we impute using our Bayesian neural network. And we're trying to understand what is the relationship of x on this z, which we don't know. So to do so, we build a causal graph to enable instrumental variable analysis. So we're trying to understand patrol on poaching, which is uncertain. We know that this is not observed, but we have whether or not we actually detected something, which is determined by whether or not we detect something is determined by how much patrol effort we actually exerted, that x at time t. However, there are a number of confounders which prevents us from learning this exact causal relationship. Some of those confounders are measured, which are the geospatial features, and some are unmeasured, which we don't even know what they are. But the act of encouragement serves as an instrument to enable us to account for these unmeasured confounders via random assignment of treatment versus control groups to enable causal analysis. The process for actually doing this causal analysis is using a technique in statistics called 2-stage least squares, where first we ask the question of what is the effect of our instrument on patrol effort. And the second is using, now that we see that the instrument actually enables the treatment, so encouragement actually leads to more patrol effort, we can then actually say, now what is the effect of patrol effort, our treatment, on the outcome we care about, which is poaching. So I'll skip through this a little bit to turn to our results. So when we're looking at what is the causal effect of encouragement on patrol effort, we see that the strength of this relationship is positive. So that means this is a valid instrument. Our encouragement actually does lead to more patrolling. And furthermore, it is, from a statistical standpoint, it is very significant, and it is actually a valid instrument because the F statistic is significantly over 10. And then now to analyze the effect of patrol effort on poaching, we look at both the effect of patrol effort on detection and the effect of patrol effort on true poaching, which is our imputed variable from the Bayesian neural network. And again, we see significant statistical effects. These coefficients, the strength of these, are both negative, and specifically the strength of patrol effort on true poaching is more strongly negative than that of just detection, which actually indicates that patrol effort does cause deterrence, that the more we patrol, the less poachers will come back in the next month, which is of huge significance in conservation. So the implications of this, from a conservation standpoint, enables us within parks to actually plan patrols to determine where we should patrol and how much time to spend there. It helps from a policy perspective to justify we should fund rangers. We need to make more areas protected. From an academic standpoint, it enables us to really bring in causal analysis to conservation biology. For AI, this enables us to build more realistic adversarial models for example, green security games. And furthermore, we can actually move towards causal models, so actually saying our actions, our interventions will actually make a difference in the world. And we can also leverage historical AI deployments for analysis. And from a statistical point of view, we're, again, enabling causal analysis with unmeasured confounds, with unmeasured outcomes by using deep learning. So this is what I have for you today. I want to highlight that we're actually extending this work and in the process of preparing for publication with a number of other co-authors. And I also want to thank all of the folks in Richardson Falls and the Uganda Wildlife Authority who are really doing the work on the ground and who have partnered with us to give us access to the data and insights. Here's how to find me online. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very nice presentation. We have time for only one question. So, yeah. Any question? Yeah, Alexander, please go ahead.
So, thanks a lot for a very good presentation. How, I mean, is it possible to transfer your model into the different other parts, other locations, or you would kind of start everything from the scratch and get really the field data and things like that?
Yeah, so Alexander asked this question of transfer learning between parks, and this is something that we've tried a lot to be able to do, but unfortunately we're just not able to build good models that actually transfer between parks. And the reason for that is, first, the landscape changes significantly, so some of the features don't even match. So if we are looking at things like animal density, if one park has elephants and another park doesn't have elephants, that feature just does not exist. But then also the nature of poaching really changes so much. First of all, because the animals are different, so what they're looking for really differs. So some animals that they're poaching for might be at high elevations, other might be at low elevations, which really changes things. But then the other just like factors that we can't really account for, like the economics of a place, how close the villages are, and the amount of poverty at those villages, how much ivory and bushmeat are being sold for on the illicit black market. All of those just make the elements of poaching radically different between parks, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. So let's move on to the next presentation, which will be given by Shizhen Chang from IARAI on the subject of a deep feature retrieval network for bitemporal remote sensing image change detection.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm Shizhen Chang, currently working as a researcher in IARAI. Actually, it's very exciting and a little bit nervous for me after 3 years virtual meeting, but it's a good start. Yeah, we gather together. And this work, the topic of my presentation is introduce a deep feature retrieval network for remote sensing image change detection task. And this work was finished with the help of my two colleagues, Michael and Pedram. My presentation includes the following 4 parts. So let's start from the research background. The topic of the change detection is actually identifying the differences of the changed objects with respect to those background that may change or unchanged over the time. So for the remote sensing, it has been successfully used for many tasks, such as the disaster monitoring, the growth of the urban, and if we have very high spectral resolution, we can also assign the growth of the crops. And back to the remote sensing task, we have known most of the changed parts are usually occupy relatively small for the whole image, and there are also other facts that may influence the performance of the detectors, such as the seasonal effect. There might be something changed, but what we're interested in, and some illumination difference caused by like the light and the color of the image might be different. And with the development of deep learning, we have known that, and it's also been shown in this paper, like with the growth of the deep learning architectures, the CNN can learn the features with much larger receptive field. For example, we have a series of inputs. Here we have some flowers, and when the architecture is relatively low, so for low-level features, they only focus on some color or some texture information of the input, while for the very high-level features, they might have a partial understanding or the whole understanding of the feature itself. So back to our task, the deep learning also has widely applied, but what we are different is we usually have more than one input. So there are two main categories we usually applied for our task. The first one is the early fusion, which for if we have more than two inputs, then we do a concat for the input and pass it to the encoder, decoder, and obtain the change map. And the second category is use the late fusion task. They use a Simon's network. The feature extractor shares the weights together, and then they pass the input to the encoder and do a concatenation for the deep features and pass it to the decoder, obtain the change map. Through a lot of experiments, it has been proved that using the late fusion strategy can better use the features of the input. But there are also other things we need to overcome. For example, when the encoder is very deep, the low-level features are not sufficiently used, and the temporal information are not fully used because using only some concatenation process. And in this paper, inspired by the successful use of the modern whole field net, we proposed a deep feature retrieval network. It's our first attempt to use it for the change detection. Here's the preliminary of the modern whole field. The key point of the modern whole field is for a given matrix X, what is we also named it as a star pattern, and then it aims to retrieve the input matrix X itself, starting from some query Causal, and using this energy function, and use some optimization series. This concat convex function can be optimized, and the update rule of Causal is finally derived by this function. And actually, to my very simple understanding, if it's just like a matching process of the X using the Causal. If the dimension of Causal is much larger, smaller than the X, it actually can be interpreted as a special branch of the pooling layer, just like this one. So it's also be written in the whole field paper itself. And it is what we used for our network. We named this structure as the whole field block in our network. And the difference is for our two input, we finally derived two features, F1 and F2, correspond to the input X1 and X2. Then for the first temporal one, we start from the query pattern WQ, and then retrieve the F1, and then doing the softmax and calculate the probability with respect to F2. And then iteratively, for the second feature Z2, we do the similar process using the same matrix WQ. So it can be viewed as a iteratively retrieval process. And then we insert this block inside between the encoder and decoder of the network. And here is the very intuitive network of our method. So where the blue part is the backbone of our network, which we use the VGG16. And then in the middle part is what we design. It should be noticed that the query we used is trainable parameters. It's updated at every iteration, and the dimension of Q is 2 we select, which is just exactly the dimension of the number of class in our task. And then we pass it to the decoder. And in order to better use the shallow layers, we use a computation of every stage of the VGG and do a feature difference, and then concat the feature together for the later process. For the experiment, we use the LiVIA-CD datasets, and here we crop the image into 256. Multiply 256 small patches, and here's the number of image pairs we used for the train validation and test. And for the compared method, we use 4 very typical change detection methods, where we have briefly introduced. The first one is the early fusion strategy, and the second and third is the late fusion strategy, and BIT is use a transformer in the middle of the encoder decoder. And here we also give a small ablation study, exclude the whole field block, and finally is our method. So and it can be seen that from the evaluation matrix and the visualized result, the proposed method it slightly beat the base model and win the best. And it's very interesting to see when the shape of the building is not so regular, the proposed method can have a better result to prevent the false alarms. And finally is the summary. We start from the brief introduction of the change detection, the deep learning for remote sensing and for change detection, and inspired by the model whole field, we give a small attempt in our work to propose the FRNet to extract the deep features in the very deep networks. But we still want to make more explorations on the model whole field for very deep feature retrieval and the segmentation task. So if you are interested in our task in model whole field, please keep more attention with our later work. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shizhen. It was a very nice talk. So, any questions? Please go.
Hi, Shizhen. Very nice presentation. I really like your work. I have a simple question, but why did you opt for shared ways in encoder phase and not, for example, 2 different encoders, each one of them for
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, you mean this one, right? Actually, is the most important thing is with a lot of experiments, using the shared weights can firstly save a lot of parameters and the storage of the computing stage. And another thing is actually, even though they have slightly difference, but what we interested in is exclude the same thing and detect the differences. So making a shared weights may help better exclude those inferences. Yes. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yeah, please.
Thank you for your talk. I have just a simple question. So, have you tested your method with other data sets, for instance, the SpaceNet 6 data set, which also did?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, that's very good question. In this work, because of the time, and we only test it in this data sets, but we are also organizing our later work, the extended works. So yeah, we will introduce more data sets in our later works. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Have you tried if your decoder is symmetric? Because actually, if you switch the images, the result should be the same, right?
We didn't change other decoders. For the decode part, we only use the very simple upsampling and CNN blocks. Yeah.
Oh. Here, if you switch the images, is the other results are comparable? So if you switch the input 1 and input 2.
You mean? Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I can try it later. Yeah. Yeah, we never try it before, but that's a very interesting question. Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks a lot, Shizhen.
Yeah, thank you, Pedram.
The next part is on the subject of knowledge-aware cross-modal text-image retrieval for remote-sensing images, which will be given by Lee.
All right, the last step to the coffee break. And hello everyone, I'm Lee from EPFL, and I'm currently a PhD student studying visual reasoning based on knowledge graph. So today I'm going to share you some idea of knowledge-aware text-image retrieval. So image retrieval often regarded as one of the fundamental tasks to explore large image archives. And if you're retrieving the image only based on the example image, you will find there is some limitation, because with the query image only, one cannot specify which elements are essential for the query. For example, for this image, it's hard to clearly state the retrieval objective, whether it is the villa, the tree, or even the grassland. So as a kind of solution, text image retrieval is introduced to explicit the retrieval subjective in a semantic way. So basically, text image retrieval aims at retrieving an image based on a text, or in reverse, recalling the text based on the image. When regarding text as a query, the perspective retrieval system gains in usability among cross-modal data, but at the same time faces the problem of information asymmetry. Especially when we retrieve based on a simple caption, because caption usually focus on the most dominant information or from subjective perspectives. So we really need a way to fill the gap between text and images, or at least narrow the gap. So here, we propose to use knowledge graph to do so. Knowledge graph contains of several objects and its relationships. And finally, it can be represented as several triplets shown as subject, predicate, object. For example, airplane stop at airport. So knowledge graph can provide common senses from human understanding and as a supplement to help several visual tasks. So the proposed knowledge-aware text image retrieval method comprises three main components. The first, as usual, is image encoder, which encodes the image feature by a pre-trained neural network. And then the text encoder, which encodes both the text and the knowledge into a joint feature space. So finally, both image and text are sent into the similarity measurement model to measure the similarity between text and images, and then ranked according to the relevance. So if you want more detailed information, the image encoder, there are basically two sets of image feature. So one is the high-level image feature, which is extracted directly from the retrained final FC layer of ResNet 101, and the middle-level feature, which is from the third block of ResNet model, and then followed by a serve attention layer. And finally, both layers are concatenated together and sent to the final fully connected layer. So for the text part, first we try to extract the features from external knowledge graph. So we have a sentence, and basically we use a tokenizer to divide the part of speech of the sentence and then put all the nouns into a word list. And then based on the word list, we're starting to involve all the one-step neighborhood in the knowledge graph into the sentence graph. And as we said before, each edge of the sentence graph can be represented as a triplet, shown as a sentence with 3 or 4 words. And then we can use a sentence transformer to embed both the sentence feature and the knowledge feature into a joint feature space. And the same as the image, we concatenated them and then sent to a final fully connected layer to ensure that they have the same dimension with the image feature. And for the similarity measurement, we use the simple negative value of pairwise Euclidean distance to measure the similarity between text and the images. And for the loss function, we use triplet loss, which is commonly used in the retrieval task. And simply speaking, it constrains the similarity score of matched image test pair rank higher than the unmatched ones. We designed our experiment on 2 commonly used text-image datasets. And we can see that the RS-ICD dataset is much more larger than UCM caption dataset. And for each sample in both datasets, we have 5 sentences describe the image content. And we also follow the common train test split of the benchmark. And for the evaluation, we use recall at top K to evaluate the model performance. So R at K means the fraction of queries for which the most relevant item is ranked among the top K retrievers. That is to say, for example, if you have if your ground truth is in top K retrievers, then basically the score for this sample is 1, otherwise 0. And the R at K means the fraction of correct items. And we also use mean recall, which is the average of all recall numbers. From the results, we can see that KCR almost achieved KCR is a proposed method, almost achieved the best results. And with ResNet 18 backbone, it slightly outperforms GALR. And the thing is that GALR has multiple image feature extractors and a post-processing stage. So KCR is less conceptually heavy. And we also can find something in the ablation study, which is common sense knowledge significantly improve the model performance. And also we found that ResNet 101 is slightly more effective than ResNet 18, which is as expected. And the experiment on the other dataset also demonstrates the effectiveness of the proposed method, where the interesting thing is that we find the improvement on the smaller dataset is larger than the larger dataset, which indicates maybe the information gap in smaller dataset is larger. And those are examples from KCR and the baseline method without knowledge graph. So the red and the green one are very easy to understand. The orange one means that those results are not annotated as a ground truth, but regarded as reasonable prediction according to human evaluation. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very nice talk. So, any questions? Please.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk. I think my question is very short. How do you build? Where do you from get the knowledge graph? I mean, do you build it by yourself or you use some existing?
Yeah. Thank you. So for this work, we use the existing knowledge graph from the other paper, and their knowledge graph is built by hand. But now we are building our own knowledge graph automatically from some nature language sources. Yeah.
Questions didn't understand some of the details at the very first slide, your example. Are you doing retrieval based on both text and images, or either text for images or images for text? If you're ever looking for retrieval that's based on here's the image and here's also a description of what I want about this image, and that's what you're retrieving, or it's like in this example here, where it's either you give a text and look for an image, and vice versa.
So the upper one is you giving a text and it looks for an image, and the later is for the image.
You never provide both. You never provide both as a query, both an image and text.
No.
Okay.
No.
So the other question is recently a lot of people in the community are using embedding the DALI uses clip.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So I don't know if it will work for this type of data because it's trained on something else, but partially, right? So have you tried it?
Yeah, I think clips might be working this work because it has a joint embedding space of text and images and very powerful pre-trained language and vision model. Yeah, probably we will use it. Thank you.
Yeah, please. Can you go to the flow chart of your work?
Yeah.
I just see that you use a tokenizer for the text description, and you only extract the non items. So if that means that you will remove or leave all other words like the verb and adjective this out of the retrieval and only use the non-item.
Yeah. So there's two aspects to answer the question, and the first is we. Apart from the knowledge, we also embed the whole sentence. So the whole sentence are embedded in the text feature, and we have this information exactly. And the other part of the answer is that, so yes, I think it's valuable to consider verbs into the knowledge, but it has long way to go because we need some techniques in natural language processing to get the exact the triplet from the sentence. Yes, it's a part of the feature work, I think. Thank you.
Maybe the last question? Is there any? So, okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
this was the last part for this session, and let's meet once again at 11.